it is just a schema definition language. It doesn't define anything. It describes how you can define something. So just having Yang doesn't buy you anything. And then you have the Yang data models. And it's like SNMP MIB all over again. 1980s called, and they wanted to have the MIB back.
Welcome to the Cloud Gambit podcast, where we mostly talk about the cloudy and immutable most of the time. What many might still refer to as, someone else's data center up in the clouds. But infrastructure, as it turns out, is still infrastructure, no matter what level of abstraction exists. And of course, DNS is DNS, and BGP is still BGP. I am particularly excited for this conversation today. It came about in a very last minute sort of way. So you, the audience out there, are going to get to hear a conversation that is very much unfiltered, unstaged, just two folks having a real conversation, an unsponsored conversation on some pretty cool things. So welcome to the show, Ivan. Lucky for us, I'm an early riser. How are things going today?
Oh, pretty good, thank you. It just caught me, the one day I'm at home because it's raining outside. So yeah, I had to grab the opportunity. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So I think most people who tune into Packet Pushers probably know all about you already. They probably seen your content over the years. So I won't ask you to give Ivan's biography and resume and all this stuff, but instead, I think the topic of this conversation, and just a reminder to the audience, everything we discuss, like links that we reference, are going to be in the show notes. So the origin of this conversation originated from a LinkedIn post that kind of turned into a kind of what you'd expect to see, critiquing Ansible or defending Ansible kind of debate, and something we're kind of used to seeing in this industry, and at conferences lots of Python versus Ansible, and you must do this thing this way with this tool to be successful, of course. But I think the first question out of the gate, so in your career, looking back, when did you realize that automation was actually an important thing for networking and it should be taken seriously, I guess?
91?
So earlier than all of us, for sure.
So we were an early ISP. And it was in the days of the squeaking modems and people dialing in, and Cisco not yet having TechX Plus. So we had to assign fixed IP addresses to the customers when they were dialing in. And some of the customers wanted to have SLIP, others wanted to have PPP, others wanted to have just a telnet session to our Linux host, where they would use, the VT100 terminal emulation to read their emails. Alan was a great email client. In those days, Cisco sucked. So they had, it's arguably whether they still suck or not, but that's a different story. They had the best routing software out there, but their access, so the remote access, the dial-in servers, they sucked. Ascent in those days was the go-to box, but we were a Cisco distributor, so we had significant discount on some boxes, but not on others. So we had to live with, if anyone remembers, the CS516, which was really a Cisco motherboard in an Emulex chassis. It looks exactly like Emulex terminal server. It was just a different color. And that thing, sucked when you tried to do the right thing for a bunch of users where every user had different requirements. A few years afterwards, they introduced TechX Plus, and it was a solution to all of those problems because you could push auto command down, or you could push the IP address down from a TechX Plus server, but we didn't have any of that. So we had to configure everything locally on the box. After the first 10 users, it was like, no, we're not doing that. So we wrote this little app that effectively had an Access database, Microsoft Access database, exported data into CSV, pushed data through a Perl script, got the router configuration file, did RCP to the router, and everything worked. So our ladies in the secretaries could get the faxed in form, because fax was something in those days. You couldn't register online. You had to fill in a form and fax it in so that we would have some paper that you actually requested internet access. And then they would just, use that Visual Basic form to put in the customer data, and bam, the Cisco Access server would be automatically provisioned.
I know that, those tuning in might think, oh, this sounds just like so old and outdated. And like, what are they even talking
it's
about?
35 years ago. Of course it's old and outdated.
Yeah, but if you replace the technologies, like the same painful process, it seems like hasn't moved that much far beyond that with
no, people are provisioning VLANs these days, but same thing.
Yeah, interesting. And so kind of just to kind of frame things up for the audience, in this conversation, we may talk about some tools, we may talk about some frameworks, or like different types of infrastructure. And before we get to too much in the weeds there, I wanted to kind of say something though that, I believe, and I'd love to get your thoughts, Ivan, that like no matter what, and if you're talking about like network automation or any distributed systems type things, if you've got like poor engineering or maybe not the right skills, you have, poor network design, and you can never go back and fix anything, and inconsistent interactions everywhere. Like that diminishes, I would believe it diminishes the effectiveness of automation for this company or whatever it is that you're automating. And it's going to, compound in like a nonlinear way as things intensify. And automation actually has the ability to amplify those underlying efficiencies rather than fixing them. So this is at the end of the day a precursor, I would say, to like reducing your network availability or reliability, for your company. So basically the human aspect, poor network design, inconsistent interactions, increasing cognitive load make me very mad and frustrated, makes me reduces my trust in automation or learning things or trying to progress. But what would you say to those things?
Well, you see, nobody wants to hear that their baby is ugly. Even though if the baby is objectively the ugliest baby in the world, nobody wants to hear that. So if you're a vendor, you can't come to a customer and tell them you can't automate your existing stuff. You have to fix it first because it sucks. Because if you do that, the next vendor will come along with a glitzy PowerPoint and say, oh, no, those people are idiots. We can fix that for you. We have this magic tool with AI that will auto-ingest your existing mess, and it will beautify it and put the unicorn dust on it, and you'll live happily ever after. We just need a purchase order. Of course, nothing ever works, and you just waste a lot of money. But, they already got the purchase order. So that's the sad reality of the whole industry. It's not just network automation, it's not just networking, it's everywhere in IT. No vendor is ever held accountable for their fairy tales.
One thing, like sort of sitting, kind of trying to be the diplomatic side of this, like I've kind of switched from working for large enterprises myself to being on the vendor side. So I've kind of gotten a interesting viewpoint on both sides of the house here. And I feel like there's two different responsibilities here. I feel like that, vendors, startups happen, they see, okay, it's as simple as how can we build something that makes us some money, right? We want to solve a real problem though, or, we want to react to what enterprises are saying are their problems, because we need to be able to sell this thing. It's got to be able to do something. And so you build this product and you're listening, it's kind of a, hey, if you will put money in our bank account, we'll build any feature you want. We'll build any product you want. We can make this do anything to solve outlandish, maybe problems that shouldn't be outlandish problems because they're caused by this, like maybe other thing over here. So it's almost like a reactionary thing. And then as startups kind of start, you've got to get customers. So like, how do you get customers without any street cred, or, brand or any sort of anything, since you're new. So you basically talk to big companies and you say, hey, this is where we're at. Like, this is an MVP. What do you want to see us build? And then you're kind of like reactionary. And that's not the case, of course, for every tech startup, obviously. But then you have on the enterprise side of the house, like they're dealing with problems a lot of times, like when I was designing networks earlier in my career, I just took the CCIE lens. I'm like, okay, let's see, we could do this, we could do that. Maybe this is overcomplicated, but hey, this is, CCIE stuff. Let's go. And it wasn't maybe sometimes in my case the most simplest solution to like meet requirements and like solve the problem. And then so you create these problems on the enterprise side and then you start feeding the symptoms and everything to startups, and then they build a solution for this thing, and it seems like it goes like in a circle. So like, do you think that there's responsibility like on enterprise? I mean, I say enterprise, but I guess service provider, I guess, could loosely fit here as well. But I'm just speaking from where I have experience. But like, what is the role, responsibility, and breakdown of like the customer and the seller, I guess?
Well, we can blame the customers for many things, including not knowing what they want, but that's usual. I blame the sellers usually for overpromising and underdelivering. So don't promise something that doesn't work. So I was working for a system integrator for ages. And one of the things we were very strict about, and there were some fights with the salespeople, and some salespeople left over that, we never overpromised to the customer. And there were cases when we told the customer, you don't need that. Or there were cases where we told the customer, yeah, we know you've been at Cisco Live, and yeah, we know how that feels, and yeah, we know that they promised you all this, but no, A, it doesn't work, and B, you don't need that. Obviously, you lose some customers. But if you lose a customer over that, then you have to ask yourself, is it really worth having that customer long term? So the beauty of our company was that we were not a public company, so we were not chasing quarterly earnings. We could afford to say, no, you should not do that. And if you think that someone else can do that for you, please go ahead. When you come back, it will be more expensive. We lost some customers. We retained probably like 80% of people who dropped by. They became long-term customers. They loved us because they knew that they could trust us, and they knew that we would say no if it doesn't make sense. From a startup perspective, you have to figure out what problem are you solving? Because if you start boiling the ocean, then, you will have a lot of nothing in the end, and it will be all over the place, and every feature will be a one-off deal for some customer, and it will be unmanageable. Obviously, I know a lot of startups doing that. On the other hand, you have startups like Tailscale, They do one thing. It's a well-orchestrated VPN. They don't try to sell you document review or AI or, I don't know, incident response. They are a VPN company. Whatever they add, it's a tiny feature that allows you to use their VPN better. But it's still a feature to use the VPN better. It's not, some crazy outlandish stuff because the customer wanted to have two products for a price of one. And everyone loves them because their stuff just works. It's a simple product that solves a simple problem. It happens to be a problem that everyone has. And so we all love them. The moment I finally figured out that I should try out Tailscale, I'm not even thinking about any other VPN.
And they have a very diligent free tier, so you can go out and try them. And yeah.
Well, they are in this nice business where the free tier costs you nothing.
Yeah.
All it costs you is a tiny little bit of the control plane interaction where you have to connect the nodes. And then the nodes talk to each other. The traffic doesn't go through you.
Yep.
So they have the privilege of being able to offer the free tier because it costs them nothing.
Yeah, you're spot on the user experience. Anybody that kind of maybe has deployed a VPN before, don't have to be an expert. Anybody that even isn't an expert or doesn't know anything about VPNs can really just go to the documentation, and whether it's in cloud, whatever the device is, and just use it. They make it very simple. The user experience is fantastic. So that leads me to a different. I was just thinking. So I remember a discussion that you had on a podcast. I don't know if it was your podcast or not. It was like back in, I hope I get some of this right because it's been a while. I think it was like 2016. I think it was with Andrew Lerner and Simone Richard. And I want to tell you something. I listened to this thing like 2 times in a row when I heard it, because I was like at that very moment in my career, I was like going through each one of those things like in real time, like where I was working, and it was like, whoa. Like I took a lot of things from that conversation, but if I remember correctly, the main thing was, it was like this whole idea of, people being the unmovable object, and like really like how culture is the main impediment to progress in a lot of these scenarios. So I was actually presenting at an event I think like a year ago or something, and Andrew Lerner happened to be there as well. So we got to like briefly chat. And I think like in enterprise, at least, it still seems to be the same case where like this, like the risk aversion is so heavy, and like the playing it safe, like at all costs, is so heavy that it's actually like a driver. It actually increases your technical debt, in turn reduces availability. It just kind of has a cascading impact. And you all did this great comparison that I think, I'm sorry if it wasn't this conversation. I think it was you though, about, I think you took those things and then you compared them to like hyperscale, how the AWSs and the FANG companies, the Googles of the world, have like commoditized things. And instead of like that risk aversion, like they just have that different culture. But would you say that enterprise, I feel like enterprise IT today is less about like finding the skilled workers and more about finding, the products that can check the box and solve the problem, and then just having folks that are good enough to operationalize those products. But yeah, I'd like to get I said actually a lot there, so I'll apply.
So you have to remember that for hyperscalers, the infrastructure is their core business. Same for the ISPs. Whereas for the enterprises, they still think that their core business is producing things or doing things, whatever things are. And IT is just that overhead activity that we would all love to get rid of, but it looks like we can't for whatever reason. So instead of, IT being the enabler to increase profits, increase reliability, decrease time to deployment, whatever, it's just that thing that no one wants to deal with because it's just a cost center and no one has any visibility into what's going on. So it's like this black box. You throw the money in, and if you're lucky, it might even work. And obviously, if you're in that position, then it's impossible to improve anything because you can't even persuade the people with the budget that what you're doing is worth doing. And particularly, engineers are really not good at selling themselves. And then you promote an engineer to a team leader, and then you promote that team leader to the IT manager. And then you promote that IT manager who's totally lost because he's really an engineer into a CIO. And well, you get what you get. Someone who is totally incompetent to tell other people what it is that they get out from IT. And if you can't sell your value, you don't get money. So the only thing that's left is you try not to mess up because nobody is seeing your value. You're not judged on your value and your contribution. You're only judged on did he mess up or not. So of course you get into this enormous risk aversion because you don't want to mess up. Whatever it is, don't touch it. It works today. And if someone comes along saying, I have this tool, particularly in US, then of course you go and you buy this tool because then you are not responsible. And in US, someone might actually sue the vendor. In Europe, not so much. So by buying the tool, you get rid of your personal responsibility. Because if you say we can do it, and then it fails, it's your responsibility. If you say Gartner is saying that 80% of enterprises in our market segment use this tool, and then that tool doesn't work, it's not your problem because Gartner said so. So of course everyone is buying tools.
Yeah. I think, and I guess kind of getting into the...
And oh, by the way, this was not dissing Gartner. They're doing a great job. Their products are used in a specific way that I hate.
Kind of one of the things I took from what you just said is like, okay, like if we're a company, we can talk to someone that does research and says that, okay, 80% of companies do X. So we will, instead of like doing a thorough evaluation of our infrastructure and our people and our practices and our culture and what we can do, and then make the decision, we're just going to say, okay, that's probability wise, if 80% do it, that means we should be able to do it too and kind of be okay, and move on.
Yeah, plus you get rid of personal responsibility. The other option is obviously you hire consultants.
The armies of Mordor emerge upon your doorstep.
Yes.
So this leads me to the sort of, I guess I wanted to thank you for sharing those insights. If you talk to most enterprises, bigger enterprises, say, and you ask them, hey, what are you doing with automation? If you're in infrastructure, typically you're going to hear probably a little bit of Ansible. If it's the cloud DevOps folks, a lot of them are using Terraform. OpenTofu is kind of making a splash now. And you have it was refreshing. I met someone, it was actually AWS reInvent last year where they, I got to say the company or anything, but they basically, we were talking and I was just asking them questions, curious, trying to learn from some of the things they were building. And they had evaluated like all the cloud orchestration tools and such. And they had a pretty solid engineering practice. And they decided they assessed their infrastructure, they assessed the tooling landscape, they assessed what they were trying to do, and they ended up building their own solution, which when they described it, it was, I don't want to say it was simple, but given the industry we work in and how complex we can make things, it was pretty simple. So that was refreshing to actually hear that someone did that and they were like massively successful doing it. But when you look at the tooling landscape today, you know, again, you have Ansible, you have Terraform, you have Pulumi, you have the tools, but then you have the platforms that they add value on. And to me, it's kind of like in two separate camps. Is like you have the tools that have a stateful component, like Terraforms, and then you have the tools that don't have a stateful component, and so you're worrying about that state because it's distributed systems. But what's your take just overall on the tooling landscape, and then comparing that to general purpose Python or Go at all costs, and you don't want to touch these tools?
Well, the first thing that where we should start the conversation is what are you configuring? Because the network devices usually use the declarative approach where you tell the device what to do, whereas the cloud APIs use the imperative approach. You create something, you delete something, you connect something to something else. So the moment you have the CRUD API, create, read, update, delete, you are in the declarative land, and you are in the hell of managing out of sync states. With most network devices, apart from interfaces on Linux, don't get me started. With most network devices, you have the device configuration, and if you in some form can build the whole config or some manageable parts of the config and just replace the old one with the new one, you are in a much simpler declarative land. So for the declarative land, for simple things, you have tools like Ansible, where you just build the device config and you replace the current device config with a new device config. And then, of course, the good people at Ansible wanted to justify their existence and build all sorts of imperative modules around that, like add interface, add VLAN, add this, add that. And it became a total nightmare. And those modules, when I last looked at them, were so unstable from release to release. I mean, the parameters that they used, that at some point I stopped updating my materials because, I could just redo the same materials every 6 months because things change so much. I once even wrote a blog post saying, the Ansible people are like the carpenter that cuts the board 3 times and it's still too short. But the basics of pushing configurations to devices are usually stable. On the other hand, if you have something like AWS API, which is, as you probably know, the fastest and the most horrible of all cloud APIs. Because you always need a handle on an object and you have to carry that handle around, and you can't refer to an object by a name like you can in Azure. You must have that handle, and the only way to name an object is to assign a tag to an object that is the name of the object, and then you search for the tag and you get the handle, and then you can use the handle in your next operation. And oh my God, what if the handle changes?
So can I dig in on something you just said, by the way? So like you're basically saying that in AWS, they don't enforce, like when you name a thing, like you can create 20 VPCs called VPC1. And
you don't name things. That's the problem.
And so in Azure naming, it's actually, sensitive to what you can only have one, VNet 1. And then you got to go to VNet 2, and then you got to go to VNet 3 because you can't name
And you
them
can
the same
refer
thing.
to things by name. You don't have to search
Yeah.
for handles.
So just like, that's a big, important distinction.
Yeah, so I tried once to provision AWS stuff with Ansible and lost my mind. And from that moment on, the only cloud provisioning I ever did was with Terraform or whatever the currently hot fork is called. Because there you just say, I want to have that. So effectively, Terraform gives you something like device configuration with the imperative cloud API, plus a bunch of other tools. So they all do the same thing. Terraform has their own language. Pulumi allows you to build your own data structures in Python. Something else does something else. Who cares?
Yeah. So yeah, you're right. What you're automating is really important, and I would say it's probably never a good idea to go into the conversation with. We have bare metal in data centers, so we also have multiple clouds, maybe, or colos, whatever, different things everywhere, and we're gonna standardize around just using Terraform for everything.
No,
that is never.
no,
not a good
I mean,
approach.
it's like a carpenter saying, I will standardize on hammer.
Yeah.
Hey, there's screwdriver, there are drill bits, there's chisel. There's saw. You need that stuff. You can't do everything with a hammer.
Yeah. Or yeah, like a handsaw versus a miter saw. Like you could have a handsaw and say, hey, I'm going to standardize on this handsaw, and I might have to hire 50
for the
people
last
to
3,000 years, they were building furniture with a handsaw. It worked. Some of that furniture is beautiful. It was also bloody expensive, I've heard. So the other thing, we were now at the low-level tooling conversation. So we were effectively comparing the straight screwdriver with the Phillips screwdriver. And that's the conversation that most people who rush into network automation without having the big picture have. Oh, my screwdriver is better than your screwdriver. But the customer wants the furniture. He needs a wardrobe. And we are missing in most of these conversations all the important things. Like you should know what you're doing and where is your data structure and where is your source of truth, or however you want to call it. I don't care. How do you version control your sources? How do you version control your services? How do you enforce the consistency? Who is doing the referential checks? Because none of these tools, well, Terraform does something, but not outside of the scope to the tool. Ansible does nothing. So there are all these bigger things that we never discuss because we're so obsessed with whether the Phillips screwdriver or Torx screwdriver is better than the straight edge screwdriver.
I feel like it's just been that way for so long, and it's really hard to change that. I mean, I know, like you said, I mean, some of these problems are inherent with distributed systems and managing distributed systems when you have limited maybe expertise and stuff, and you're inheriting designs too. Like another angle of this is like it's always easier to, in some of the big companies I worked for, we had 5 different brownfields and then the new greenfield that we're working on at any given time, and it's like these were built and designed by different people, each one of them, that are like no longer with the company. And to that point, like a lot of them were kind of, they were built almost in the right way per se for that time frame and what the requirements were at that time and what we had available to us. But then if technology changes fast, and although the underlying protocols and standards and certain things don't change, like TCP/IP is not going anywhere anytime soon and such, but the networks, just kind of like when hybrid cloud came along, like the way that you could use network is a competitive advantage and operationalize this hybrid approach where you might have a front end living in AWS and your as you start piecing these things together, that design looks different than your SDN fabric or your old WAN or some acquisition that you had, maybe that you never, and maybe it was OSPF. Like I worked for a company at one point where we were running like four different routing protocols because we had done a few acquisitions, and it's just like redistribution, and we had this NAT that never got taken out, and then you have all these things. And like once you get there to where you have like 3 of these things, it's just it's hard. It's time, money, and resources to go back and start trying to pull it forward. So how is there a different way to think about the brownfield greenfield scenario, or is there like some light at the end of that tunnel?
Well, there is a well, as usual, I have an answer that is clean, simple, and unapplicable, which is you don't automate the brownfield. In the ideal world, you start building the next generation stuff that is parallel to the existing stuff. And we managed to pull that off a few times in the data center, where they would just build the next generation fabric adjacent to the previous one with just a few links between them. And if we managed to persuade them that this should be layer 3 links, we won like 80% of the battle. On WAN, it is slightly harder, but even there, as you're doing the equipment refresh, you're just reconnecting the circuit, which usually ends on some VLAN somewhere, or maybe it's an MPLS VPN circuit, in which case you don't have that much of a problem anyway. So as you're doing equipment refresh, the new stuff gets automated.
So it's like innovation by attrition in a sense.
Yeah, and then at some point you define the old stuff, Superfund site, and you go away.
That sounds really good. It's it's clean, it's simple, and it makes life infinitely easier, I suppose.
So, once I had a large customer and they were building sort of a private cloud, and they wanted to port over all the old craziness that was grown organically, like, favela, those things on the hills that you just look at and you wonder how gravity doesn't assert itself until it does. And so they wanted to port all that crap into the new system. I was like, hey guys, no. Take a totally fascist approach. This is what you can do. You cannot do anything else in the new system. Oh, you don't like it? You can stay on the old system. But it is not going to be upgraded. You will not get any new resources if you want them, and we will stop maintaining it after X months. No, it's your choice. You can adapt to the new rules or you can stay there.
Yeah.
And then they were like, oh, yeah, but we have all these old applications. And in some cases, we don't even know if someone is using them. I'm like, turn them off. If the phone doesn't start ringing, you're okay.
If you don't know if somebody's using something, yeah, that's a good point. What?
Well, they were pretty organized. So for every application that they had someone who was responsible for that application. So they had a name and a contact associated with each app. And I said, well, just call them. Maybe they no longer work for you, in which case the answer is clear.
I think that's kind of the opposite of what you see, or maybe just drawing on some of my experiences. Usually like on the network engineering side, you can come in, you can solve any problem. The business asks for it. Yeah, we'll get it done. Usually like no matter what it is.
But you see, that is the root cause of all the problems you have.
Yeah.
Once, we had a customer and they were exactly like that. Yeah, we'll solve whatever problem with the existing equipment. It was such a mess. And then one of my CCIEs came to me saying, well, we have a challenge with this customer, and we all knew that customer. I was like, what's it this time? oh, they want to do this and this and this and this and this. And I'm like, no. You go back with the sales guy, with the account manager, you tell them, no, we will not do that because it's too complex. It will not work. You will only have problems. And instead, I mean, yes, we are selling boxes, but sorry, the only solution is X more boxes, and you structure things this way, and you separate the functions on different boxes, and then it will work. You know what their IT manager said? Thank you. You're the first guys that came to me with a solution.
And once you go down any of these areas from a design perspective, remember, it's like one step forwards, and you want to go back and change anything, it's like you got to walk a mile backwards to change tiny things once they're being used.
And the problem is sometimes that we can't push back. We can't explain why investing X will save us whatever, time, stability, reliability, whatever you want, agility in the future. Because we always think that we have to solve the problem with the current set of screwdrivers and hammers, and we really need a chisel.
One thing too, from I think it was at Andrew Lerner and Simone Richard conversation too. I think, did you all talk about APIs a lot on that one?
Could be.
I think
one of the things I was definitely talking with someone about APIs. Yeah.
Yeah, I think the part of the conversation was that the promise that APIs are going to kind of man, that's going back in the Wayback Machine. I can't remember if I even remember this, but I have to go back and check. I will link the conversation actually in the podcast. So those of you can go back, because it's interesting to see. I think you all made a lot of good calls on that recording that have aged well. A lot of times,
thank you.
Takes don't age so well. But one of the things that I think had been predicted, I don't know who on the call, but if network vendors, if we can get our API act together and return structured data and be, take that and then, hey, throw some software development acumen on top of the whole thing, and maybe we have something good come out of the end of the tunnel. But what about your take from whenever that was, 2016 till now, we're in 2025. Have you seen progression with APIs done the right way for straight face network vendors?
No. I just had a discussion with one of my good friends a few months back, and I'm not sure I can name him. Anyway, you have the Yang thingy, which people think will solve all the pains in the world and bring peace to Middle East or wherever. Forgetting that it is just a schema definition language. It doesn't define anything. It describes how you can define something. So just having Yang doesn't buy you anything. And then you have the Yang data models. And it's like SNMP MIB all over again. 1980s called, and they wanted to have the MIB back. The only progress we made was that now with the augmentation and whatever it's called, you can insert your own variables into the tree, whereas with MIBs, you had to build a parallel tree. Because now we don't use numbers, we use names, and names are more flexible than numbers usually. So we can insert anything, anywhere, and we have namespaces, so every vendor can have their own namespace within the same data structure. Still, they can only ever standardize the maximum agreeable least common denominator across all the vendors participating in the RFC creation. Which means that all the interesting stuff is out of scope. Which means that you are back to the vendor data models. And now, some vendors actually got the memo and they can generate JSON or XML. problem is that some vendors turn JSON or XML into bloatware. So those things are so huge that generating that and processing that results in TCP burnouts like we had with SNMP2 when we were polling the MIPS too frequently. Then you have vendors that can do this over SSH and netconf. And netconf, oh, by the way, netconf was promised like a panacea that will bring the peace to the network management world. It's just a thin wrapper around SSH, does nothing else than introduces transactions and sessions. And it requires that things be passed in an XML envelope. Good for them. And then you have Cisco Nexus OS that gives you the XML response that contains a text field that is the result of the show command, and then you parse the show command. So how great is that? Anyway, so that other vendor can send you XML or JSON data over SSH or netconf. SSH session netconf session is properly prioritized. SSH session is high priority. So you pull down BGP table, your BGP process stops because SSH has priority. And then all the good stuff you can't get into in structured data because no one ever thought about that. Because even Juniper, for example, where in theory everything should start as a structure, and then it should be rendered into a show printout. And so because it is a data structure internally, you can easily generate XML or JSON out of that. It looks like even they implemented some of the interesting show commands with print statements. So you can't get them as structured data. And the interesting things that you want to look at are simple things like transceiver levels. And you only get them in show tag internal details or something like that command. And then you scrape that thing like crazy and you try to get that one field out of it that you really need because you want to know what your transceiver level is. You want to know whether you have errors. You want to know whether, you have to take the dark pencil and scrub on the cable to reduce the light. And you can't get that in any standard structured data format.
Do you think that's the result of just how these CLIs and how network devices were built originally and how it was humans interacted with them from the kind of like their origins, and that's kind of the root of the problem? And we've just kind of added upon that over time and then said, hey, we can wrap this, like, oh, we can provide you a JSON payload, but we're going to scrape some stuff and just put this little wrapper thing around it kind of thing. But it's still, we're not really changing the way back, the guiding principles that we built this OS that powers this hardware that routes your packets.
Yeah, I was once doing an SDN workshop for a vendor that had the legacy code base comparable to Cisco iOS, probably a bit younger than that. And I was telling them that one of the problems of SDN is that we don't have structured data because all the show printouts are not implemented as collect data, structured data, and then render the data to get the printout. They are just print statements sprinkled throughout the code. And an old developer in the last row raises his hand and says, and I put them there.
Oh, wow. That's pretty hilarious.
Yeah. So I think that the first vendor that got how things should be done was Juniper. In their case, it's usually data first, and so that's why they can generate JSON or XML pretty easily for most of the show commands. Looks like, unfortunately, sometimes they took some shortcuts for the internal stuff that we really need. The other problem in even in Juniper is that the data structures they generate are bloatware. So if you try to pull down 1 million entry BGP table in text format versus XML format versus JSON format, there is some slight difference in the size of the printout you get. Nexus OS, I think, also uses the data structures internally. Arista, it looks like, I never got anyone to talk about it, but it looks like they went through a severe cleanup program where they went from print statements to having data in the code and then rendering the data. So they can do pretty good show printouts. iOS is the worst. If I got it right, they actually took the TLF acquisition and added a process on iOS that scrapes the show printouts and creates XML out of that scraped printout. And then you have things like FR routing. I mean, I love FR routing. It's open source, it's free. What's not to love? They're doing a great job. They're responsive. They fix stuff. But they don't understand that you don't change data structure once you got it wrong. You can version your printouts. You can change the CLI commands to get a different printout, but you can't have the same command generate completely different data structure just because you figured out what needs to be done 4 releases in. Which brings me to my favorite API vendor, which is Nokia with at least SR Linux. They change the configuration data model supposedly once a year. And I wrote a blog post, so you can add that to the show notes so people will understand why I'm so upset about that. I mean, otherwise, I love what Nokia is doing. I love that you can download SR Linux straight from Docker Hub. I love what SROS is doing. I even figured out how to configure it, so it's great. We are good buddies now. But hey, changing the configuration data model just because you want to have religious purity? Come on.
I know I don't want to take up too much of your time. Do you have time for one more question? I know we're at the hour.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Sweet. You brought
I could rant all day. It's
Yes.
hard to stop me,
Okay.
as you can see.
You brought up a few things. I wasn't planning to go here. Well, I didn't have much of a plan in this coming into the conversation, but it's been great. This has been fantastic. But you brought up free range, open source stuff. And one thing I've noticed, these open operating systems, like, of course, licensing is tricky with if it's like vendor-owned open source. But one thing I've noticed, I've had a few just kind of like digging in on some of the areas that have made certain parts of cloud and things successful. But one area that I've noticed that I thought was neat, I'm not an expert in this topic, it's just an observation, but you have like the CNCF, where you basically have these projects, and I think the Open Telemetry project is a good example here, where you basically have like multiple vendors contributing, but you basically have this framework. You have a foundation in which everybody kind of starts from. Everybody is contributing to that foundation, and that foundation is like the starting point where vendors can kind of come on and start building their things that they can like sell and things. So like, that might be the other extreme to like what we're talking about, like on the other end. But is there a happy, like, where does open source fit into this? And especially like vendor open source or vendor owned open source in the news lately. And by lately, I mean like the last 10 years has been a hot kind of a hot mess with the license changes, and the community built this thing, and now we're just gonna switch the license and cut everybody out. But the foundations seem that it'd be a better approach, Linux Foundation, CNCF, and so forth, to some of the foundational technologies. But yeah, just curious of your thoughts there.
Okay, so let's get the framework out of the way. You remember Open Daylight?
Yeah.
You remember OpenStack?
Yeah.
So do I need to say more?
Why don't you dig? So why don't you dig in and just kind of give a high level summary for the audience?
Yeah, you see, the problem is that once you allow the vendors to drive the show, either through their financing or their contribution, the whole thing becomes, just the exercise of how are we eventually going to monetize that. So, for example, Open Daylight, it was a mix of everything that everyone have thrown in. They didn't even run it through the blender so that it would mix properly. It was a bunch of independent thingies, each doing their own thing. And supposedly there are production deployments. I've never seen one. And every time I write about that, I hear from a startup whose business model is we will support customers running Open Daylight. And of course, they want to tell how many success stories they have. But I never heard from anyone saying we use it in production and this is what we do. It's always someone at the other end of the world. Like, in my good old days, Banyan Vines was supposedly really popular in Australia. Australians knew nothing about that. Then you have OpenStack, where, if you just take a look at networking, the default networking in OpenStack sucked big time. I remember a blog post when someone was saying, and this was all based on Open vSwitch, oh, we got Open vSwitch to forward 1 gigabit of user data from a server, and this is ludicrous speed. And this was at a time when VMware was saturating 40 gig uplinks. And the reason the free networking in OpenStack sucked so much was because every networking vendor wanted to sell you their plugin. Well, they would give you the plugin, they would sell you the rest of the infrastructure that worked with that plugin. So everyone on the enterprise side from the vendor looking at OpenStack as an enabler to sell more of their proprietary stuff. And it was the same with networking. It was the same with storage. Not so much with compute because KVM was there and it's really hard to mess up KVM. You can try hard, but in the end, it still works. So yeah, I'm skeptical of frameworks. The second thing is, as you said, vendors who want to open source something because they hope that this will popularize their thingy and attract some community contributions and build community around that will, spread the gospel and make the whole thing successful. And of course, if you are in the community and you are young and naive and haven't figured out yet how this world works, then you think that your contributions, entitle you to have some say in the stuff. Well, they do, unless 80% of the contributors work for a vendor, and then, the democracy kicks in.
So they do until they don't, which does happen quite a bit.
Obviously, since this is open source, nothing is stopping you from forking it and going on your own. Like you mentioned before, Open Tofu and Terraform?
Yeah.
Obviously, that hurts everyone. On the other hand, it's really hard to make money from open source. There are only some companies that made big money from open source, like Red Hat. Most of the people have a hard time building a business model that would, allow them to sell services or do whatever else based on the core open source software that they provide. And then, of course, you have the leeches like Amazon, who takes your open source software and then they start offering it as a service, fixing some stuff, never contributing back, usually. Maybe they started contributing back lately. I don't know. The last time I've heard, it was a big problem that they would just take your stuff and make money with it and never give anything back. And then, of course, you go like, why exactly am I doing this?
Yeah, the whole Elasticsearch thing was interesting.
They did a bunch of this things, I think, over the years. So, of course, as a smaller vendor investing into something, you have to protect yourself somehow. And it's hard.
Yeah. So kind of like to summarize the beginning and midpoint of that, like even when you go to a foundation or something, if most of your contributors, because like, of course, like the vendor, usually they will say, hey, we're going to pay for one of our staff to spend, or maybe 5 of our staff to spend 20% of their time or something on this project. And then once you get in, of course, unless you're one of the few that's like really I really want to do what's best at all costs and fight everybody along the way that tries to suck us out from the vision. But if you have enough from that vendor contributing to that project, it's like tragedy of the commons, and well, not necessarily, kind of where you just...
you see, as long as... So the first question is, why are you doing open source? Is it because you're trying to make money in some circuitous way? Or is it because you're trying to solve a problem? And if you're trying to solve a problem and you get a bunch of people who equally likely want to solve a problem, and eventually you get someone who throws in 20% of someone's time to solve that problem, that thing can work. But if you're doing this just so that you would attract people and make money in the end, without focusing on, I want to solve the problem, then you have a problem.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Okay, one last question. I promise this is it. One thing that I wish I would have picked up on quicker was applying more software engineering principles to like how I viewed the building of infrastructure, which I did pivot pretty hard and go very deep into trying to take a principled approach to like, hey, some of this stuff has, I've got to learn, like actually learn Git. I need to really learn version control, not just commit to main and follow the README. I need to understand like what the life cycle of the things is that I'm how things are going to be coupled and all these different things. So what's your take on that? This is a hard topic in the network engineering community. What's your take on network engineers? Hey, extending an olive branch out and saying, hey, the developers got a few things right that are pretty good. Maybe I can take some of these, say DevOps, GitOps, whatever you want to call it, but this kind of a different way of managing infrastructure and take some of these things and learn them. Do you think this is an important skill in the future?
Oh, absolutely. You see, we have two generic problems in networking that I always rant against. It's not an engineering discipline. And you can argue that it is, but sorry. Compared to other things that are called engineering, we are just throwing spaghetti at the wall and look what sticks and what falls off. And it's all messy, obviously. And, there's a lot of stuff lying around in the end, but this is how we do things. And if you take a look at what vendors are doing, I mean, yes, there is engineering involved in building their product. But is there engineering involved in saying this is how the product has to be used in the network? And these are the fundamental principles why you have to use this product in this network this way? I don't think so. The best you get are validated designs and white papers and recommended practices and what have you, which sometimes are very useful, but in the end, they are there to sell more boxes or products or what have you. In mechanical engineering, you have nuts and bolts, and you know what strength each one has to have, and you have the either analytical methods or computational methods to figure out how many nuts and bolts you need to hold the bridge together. Yeah. We don't have anything like that in networking. And so we have this CCIE level MacGyver approach, like, yeah, I can fix everything. If I yell enough at the vendor and, show them a big enough purchase order, they will implement this one feature that I desperately need so that I don't have to redesign my broken design. And then I am one step further away from sanity. But hey, they sold the boxes. They are happy. I didn't have to do the redesign, so I'm happy. Someone 5 years down the road won't be happy, but who cares? And then we take that mentality and we bring it into software engineering because, network automation, once you get past the beauties of Ansible and Terraform, is really software engineering. You need system thinking. You need to think about where data is. You need to think about what the structure of the data is, what data you need, where you will have it, what's the persistence, what are the consistency rules, what are the workflows, what are the processes, who is talking to whom, how it all fits together. And we just don't have that knowledge.
Do you think the younger generation is going to bring that over time?
It depends on which direction they will be coming from. If they will be coming from software engineering direction into networking, then maybe yes.
You're spot on with so many things there. It's like, think about it from the trades. Like if you're an electrician and you got your world, electric certified engineering associate, and then you go in and you do electric at someone's house and it burns down. That might be the last time you ever do an electrical job. Saying, if you're, I don't want someone operating on me that got their skills from a book and hasn't practiced, and they've been validated. But that's a human life and structural damage. And historically, like, technology didn't power human life as much, or didn't like burn houses down and stuff. But now, like, technology is so interconnected with everything that it is becoming like we need to move to that. I don't know if adopting something like apprenticeship, like the trades do, or what the right answer to that is, but something like that,
Yeah, well, we have to become aware that we can actually kill people. Not with Facebook being down, although even that could be a problem in some niche cases. But imagine you're building a network for a hospital. 10 years ago, network was a commodity. It was nice to have, and everything was on the paper, and the X-ray images were printed out on film. Today, everything is accessible through the network. And we haven't changed our mentality or our discipline or our approach to building networks. we're still guessing and throwing spaghetti at the wall.
Yep. Agreed. I'm still, or I wouldn't say I'm early in my career, but I'm not at the latter end. I still have hope. I still see some light at the end of the tunnel that maybe in my lifetime.
That's great.
Some things will going.
I'm a grumpy old semi-retired man, as you can see.
Well, I get that way too, and I have to I have to, like, I hate like going through the same thing, running into the same brick wall and saying, hey, you know what? Why don't we just do that again? Why don't we do that again? We're going to expect different results if we just keep doing it again, and maybe some magic will happen and something will happen. But
so you believe in macro level quantum physics?
Oh, we'll see. I do. It's, you got to have it. It's hard to, it's one of those things too, where you want to believe in the stuff that you're working on. You want to make the right decisions. You want to do the right things by your customers or by the business that you work for. And, it's hard to not get stuck in that. But I've noticed, like, as my career's gone on, I've lost a lot of patience that I used to have. And I try to keep it. I try to be a patient person at all costs, but it does get harder. The more you see the same sort of cycles repeated, the more you're like, why can't we just get out of this thing? And we got to move it forward. But yeah, we'll see. Only the future will tell. But this has been unbelievably insightful conversation. I'm really glad very last minute, I was able to get you on.
Sure.
It was really funny how that happened, but I thought that, for not a lot, no planning and just a good conversation, I thought this went really well. I learned a lot, and the audience, I imagine, will learn a ton as well. But if you have do you have any lasting comments that you would like to impart to the audience and to the world?
Oh, don't give up.
Never, never, never give up, as my children say after watching Thomas.
What we are doing is incredibly important, regardless of what we think of it or how other people view us. But hey, we are like plumbers and electricians. Without us, this world can no longer work. So never give up.
Love it. Awesome. Well, thank you again. And everything that we linked, all the links we talked about, you can find in the show notes. So if you have if you're bored during the afternoon and you want some light reading, definitely come back and check out the show notes and give it a shake.